Please welcome Senator Sanders.
Thank you very much, and let me thank you for inviting me to come to Wisconsin. As I drive around Wisconsin and as we saw your landscape flying in, there is no other state in this country that I think is closer to my state of Vermont. We feel very warmly about Wisconsin. I think we are sister states. And thank you very much for allowing me to say the word. I am here today because I believe in the history of Wisconsin. I share with you your pride in the progressive tradition of this state, which has led the country in so many ways. And I know, because of the extraordinary grassroots efforts that you have and will undertake, that once again, Wisconsin will lead the nation in progressive activity. These are somber times for the United States. All of you are more than aware of the discussions that are taking place in Washington about a war with Syria. And let me just say this about war. And let me just say this about aggressive action. I believe in war and aggressive action, and the time is long overdue that we declared war against high unemployment in this country and that we created the millions of jobs that this nation needs. Now, wouldn't it be a great thing if all of the media and all of the political leaders of this country were focused on how we create millions of jobs, how we rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, how we deal with the reality that real unemployment in this country is not 7.4%, but almost 14%, that youth unemployment, our entire generation of young people, high school grads, college grads, unemployment for them is close to 18%, black unemployment for kids, young black kids, close to 40%. Let us declare war against unemployment, create millions of jobs in this country. And if we're going to go to war, let's declare war and defeat the trend toward a collapsing middle class. Against young people in Wisconsin and Vermont and all over this country who are working for $7, $8, $9 an hour. Let's raise the minimum wage to a living wage. How's that for you want another war that will rally the American people? How about ending the national disgrace that the United States remains the only country in the industrialized world that does not guarantee health care for all people and the right? How about a war for a single-payer national health care system? Now, you really want a war, if you're really hungry for war, you really want to be aggressive. How about a war that ends the trend in this country toward an oligarchic form of society, where a handful of Now how about a war to fulfill the dreams of the American people and creating an egalitarian form of society rather than one in which the top 1% owns 38% of the wealth in America, while the bottom 60% owns 2.3%. You want a war? Let's declare war against oligarchy. Now, if you really got your finger on the trigger, and you really want to be brave and courageous and go to war, what about a war against Wall Street and their greed? Today, the top 6 financial institutions in this country have assets of over $9 trillion, which is equivalent to 2/3 of the GDP of the United States of America. They write 2/3 of the credit cards and issue half of the mortgages in America. And after their greed, their recklessness, and their illegal behavior drove this country into the worst economic downfall since the Great Depression, you'll all be delighted to know that after you bail them out, they're now enjoying record-breaking profits. Now, how about breaking up the major financial institutions in this country? Tough. Some people talk about Congress regulating Wall Street. Let me tell you, I am a United States Senator. That ain't the way it works. Wall Street regulates the Congress. Now, how about another war to save the planet and address the planetary crisis of global warming? To the oil companies and the coal companies and telling them that we have got to transform our energy system, and when we do that, and when we move to energy efficiency, new forms of transportation, wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, not only can we cut greenhouse gas emissions, lead the world in combating global warming, we can create millions of jobs doing that. How about that one? And here's another war that I think we should fight. People fought and died in this country for democracy. And in my state of Vermont, at our town meetings, held in March, what democracy means is one person, one vote. That's what it means. It does not mean a handful of billionaires controlling the political process in this country. So how about a war to overturn this disastrous Supreme Court decision on Citizens United and move from public Let me say a brief word on Syria. And I know that all of you agree with me that in Syria now we have a thug running that country who has made billions on the backs of its people, and recently has waged chemical warfare against his own people. But let me tell you something about foreign policy and wars. I am old enough to remember Vietnam. And I remember like it was yesterday, Henry Kissinger standing in front of charts and maps telling us that if Vietnam fell, there would be a domino impact which would influence the entire world. Well, Vietnam fell. Right now, American corporations, after having shut down 50,000 factories in America over the last dozen years, are now investing $10 billion a year in Vietnam, where the average wage is $1 an hour. What they told us about Vietnam was wrong. I remember Afghanistan, a country which virtually did not have an army. That was going to be an easy conquest. 11 years later, we are still in Afghanistan, in the longest war in the history of the United States of America. And I remember Iraq, the war I voted against. And I remember President Bush standing on that aircraft carrier talking about mission accomplished. And after 4,600 men and women were dead, as chairman of the Veterans Committee, I can tell you what I think most of you know. We have tens of thousands of good, decent men and women back here in the United States today who are suffering with traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder. We're trying to figure out how we deal with those issues. That was Iraq, which was, as I recall, a slam dunk, no problem. Point is that war has unintended consequences. The point is that when you get into a bloody and complicated civil war in Syria, it is going to be, in my view, pretty hard to get out of that war. Now, I know that for progressives in Wisconsin and Vermont and all over this country, these are difficult times. These are painful times. I think a lot of people are disappointed with the actions coming from the White House, whether it's this effort toward a war in Syria, whether it's the NSA and the other invasions of privacy, whether it is not standing up to right-wing Republican extremism. And I think that disappointment stretches all across this country. But I just want to say a couple of things about that. Martin Luther King Jr., whose great speech we marked the 50th anniversary of just the other day, reminded us of something very, very profound, and that is the arc of history is very long, but it tends toward justice. In other words, there are ups and there are downs. And as we stand here this afternoon, all of us can think, and those of us who are older, those of us who have read history, know that 30, 40, 50 years ago in this United States of America, our African American brothers and sisters could not sit at lunch counters. Schools were segregated. Black Americans did not have the right to vote. I think it is fair to say that 20 or 30 years ago, nobody would have dreamed that this country would have gone as far as it has in not only electing our first African-American president, but re-electing him. So whatever you may be concerned about in terms of the White House, don't underestimate that enormous transformation in the United States in terms of race. Do we have a lot more to do with regard to race? Believe me, we do. We have made progress. In terms of women's rights, think back. Think back about where we were 40 or 50 years ago. Think about women who struggled for the right to vote, for legislation that protected their property rights, divorce law, abortion law, etc., etc. All of us are aware that around the country, right now and in Wisconsin, there are attacks against women's rights. I am more than aware of that. But do not underestimate the fact that within a short period of time, I expect that half of the legislators in the Congress will be women. That will be true all over this country. We have made progress in gender equality. And on the issue of gay rights, the progress has almost been breathless. Nobody would have believed 20 years ago that right-wing Republicans would be on the defensive in terms of gay marriage and other gay relations. Why do I say that? I say that because things change in ways that sometimes you cannot really predict. So while on a number of fronts, in terms of breaking down inequality in America, whether it's racial, gender, whatever, sexual orientation, we have made real progress. Clearly on the economic front, not only have we not made progress, we are losing ground significantly. And what must we do? First of all, what we must do is never give up hope, never throw our hands up in despair and say, this is too hard, I can't do it, I'm tired. We have a moral obligation to our kids and our grandchildren to maintain the fight that those people have waged in this country decade after decade after decade. We simply do not have the moral right to say, sorry, I'm backing off. Too much depends upon our need to continue the fight. And let me just say something else about that. This is important. There is a reason why the favorability rating of the Congress is at 15%. And the reason is not complicated. On issue after issue, Congress ignores the needs of the American people. And this is moment, because this is not just Bernie Sanders talking, this is what the facts are. In Washington right now, there is some discussion by the president and some Republicans and some other Democrats to cut Social Security for a so-called chain CPR. That's what they're talking about in Washington. Do you know what the American people are saying? Don't cut Social Security. And there is some discussion coming from the big money interests about raising the Social Security retirement age to 70 and Medicare eligibility age to 70. And you know what? Democrats, Republicans, and independents are saying, no way. You can't make life harder for senior citizens who are struggling today. Do not cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. All over the country, that's what the American people are saying. In terms of tax policy, our Republican friends and some Democrats are prepared to support and continue an extremely regressive and unfair tax system. 1 out of 4 major corporations does not pay a nickel in taxes right now, and the kind of revenue that we're bringing into the government through taxes is significantly lower than it used to be. And you know what the American people are saying across the board? They are saying, ask the rich and large corporations to start paying their fair share of taxes. And in terms of this Syria, I will just tell you what is going on in the state of Vermont. Our phones are popping off the hook. We are getting many, many emails. 95% of the comments that we are getting say, do not go into war in Syria. So I am not going to tell you, that everybody in the United States is progressive, but I will tell you that on major issue after major issue, the American people agree with much of what we stand for. If you give the American people a long list of issues, do you know what issue they care most strongly about? And that is to create millions of jobs in America. That's what they care about. So our job, and it's a tough job, admittedly, but our job is to educate and to organize and to demand, for once, that the President and the United States Congress start listening to the American people, create the millions of jobs we need, rebuild the middle class, protect the social safety net, be aggressive in making sure that every American has health care as a right. That's what we need to do. Now, when you have a handful of billionaires exercising enormous control over our economy, when these guys are prepared to shut down a plant in Wisconsin or Vermont or any other part of America so they can make 5 cents more by going to China, they're prepared to do that. When you have a situation today where the Koch brothers, Sheldon Adelson, and these fellows can sit in a room and pour hundreds of millions of dollars into the political process, our job is tough. It is tough. But this is what I believe and what I have always believed, is that at the end of the day, if working people, if the middle class, if young people, if seniors, if people stand up together, we can beat big money. I believe that. But that isn't easy. That requires us to continue the struggle. The last point that I want to make is that these are tough times in our country economically. They are tough times in our country politically. And I think the major struggle that we face is to deal with oligarchy, to take on the big money interests who have so much influence over this nation. But there is something else equally important that we have got to do, and we don't do enough of. One of the real concerns that I have about another war in Syria, in the Middle East, which would take us into, we've been through war now for 11 years. We have a defense budget which is almost equivalent to the money being spent on the military by every other country on earth. What I worry about is a nation which continues to focus on war and forgets about the needs of ordinary people. And our job, and this is a tough job. It's a tough job because you got CNN, you got all the TV out there, you got all the right-wing radio, you got all the newspapers out there. What our job is to go into our hearts and to rekindle a vision of what this country can be. And that vision should be a country where we lead the world and become an example, model for the rest of the world in terms of doing our best to make sure that all of our kids have the best possible education, where college education is not the most expensive in the world, but that we create a situation where any person in this country, young or old, is able to get all the education that they need, regardless of the income of their family. Now that's not utopia. That is not a utopian vision. It is a vision which says we want to lead the world in the quality of life that our people have. That's what we want to export all over the world. We want to have the best healthcare system in the world, which focuses on keeping us healthy, that treats us when we are sick, that is not by far the most expensive and wasteful in the system. Wouldn't it be great if we could show the rest of the world how you have high-quality health care for all people in a cost-effective way? Wouldn't that be an extraordinary export to the United States? And instead of tapping the phones or the emails of foreign leaders all over the world. Wouldn't it be great if we invited those leaders to Washington to talk together how we're going to be extremely aggressive in cutting greenhouse gas emissions, coming up with the new technologies that we need. Think what that would mean for the spirit of young people. And think what it would mean as we focus on the simple question of how do we live well? How do we love each other? How do we create sustainable communities where people feel good about where they are living, are proud of where they are living? In other words, instead of being the major military power on earth, instead of being a country that exports weapons of death all over the world, let's export something very different, a new quality of life for all of our people. So, in the midst of these tough times, it is absolutely imperative, it is a moral responsibility that we keep the faith, that we continue the struggle. I am absolutely confident. I don't know when the day is going to come. It may not come, in my lifetime, it may not come in your lifetime. But I have absolute confidence that the day will come when this country rekindles those virtues, those parts of our past that were the envy of the entire world, that we rally our young people in the energy and the idealism that they have, that we are going to be a compassionate people, that we are going to be in the vanguard of making this world a better place in which to live. So, none of that happens unless we educate, unless we organize, unless we keep fighting. Thank you all very much for this conference.